warm welcome to our policy podcast, Building Wealth, Building Community, hosted by Duncan and Andy from the Social Enterprise Scotland policy team. Social enterprises and other types of inclusive democratic business models are building a better economy across urban and rural Scotland. We'll be talking about some of the big policy issues of the day and, crucially, the real-world impacts in our local communities.
Hello, welcome back. This is the Social Enterprise Scotland podcast, Building Wealth, Building Community. You're here with me today, the Policy Officer, Andy Patterson, and I'm also with...
And Duncan, the Policy Manager from Social Enterprise Scotland.
And also with us today.
I'm Jill. I am the Programme and Partnerships Manager for the Scottish Community Alliance.
And that's what we're talking about today, is the Scottish Community Alliance and social enterprises. So Jill, I'm sure it's a question you get fairly often. What is the Scottish Communities Alliance?
Well, the Scottish Community Alliance is basically a coalition of community-based national networks and intermediaries that represent the community sector in Scotland. We're made up of 28 different national networks and intermediaries, and I mean, basically that whole sort of membership that we have is a really diverse view of what the community sector in Scotland actually is. And the reason we all come together is a commitment to community empowerment, community wealth building, local governance. These are the kind of cross-cutting areas that we all work towards and collaborate around and seek to influence for the benefit of local communities.
Very well succinct, and I think that came together really successfully. It would have been almost 2 months, maybe 6 weeks. February, yeah. Oh, that was a long time ago.
If it's the local people leading event you're referring
it
to,
is.
Andy.
Yeah. Would you like to talk a little bit more about the local people leading event?
Yes, I would. So, that was fantastic, I think. We also have had good feedback from the event. So the Local People Leading event was an event that we held in Parliament in February. It was a complete parliamentary takeover. So all the committee rooms, the chamber, the lobby, the garden lobby and stuff like that. And so I suppose the reason that it was such an important event, for one, is that you've got to apply to get that space. And it was the first one we've held in the last 10 years. So it felt like a really important landmark for the community sector in Scotland. And what we sought to do was to basically bring local activists from right across Scotland together in the Scottish Parliament to show, the diversity of the sector, but also that, the sector is greater than the sum of its parts. And that was some of the amazing feedback we had, is that I think people are just rightly so used to kind of working in their either hyper locally or regionally, and of course have good partnerships and stakeholders across the work that they do. But I think seeing themselves as part of a sector that could really push forward and change things for the better for people across Scotland was really amazing to see. And I think people felt that on the day. So we had over 200 people attend from the islands. It was a really good, diverse geography that turned up on the day, and just hearing from people and the work that they do and the importance of it, I think, was really special.
Yeah, being there on the day as well, I thought there was something incredibly strong about groups coming together to talk about community empowerment, but doing that physically within the Parliament where the power is actually held.
Yes.
But I think occasionally people can maybe get a wee bit lost when they're like, community empowerment, what does that mean? So what would you say is the definition of kind of community empowerment, and is there any good examples from all the networks that we work with that you would be like, here's a great example?
I think community empowerment happens all the time by the local organisations that were part of that event and across Scotland every day. I think the difficulty around it is, and perhaps why people struggle to understand it or access that understanding of it, is because there's so many barriers. So when we talk about the community sector, what we mean is the part of the third sector that's owned and led by local communities. And that is either about land ownership, social enterprise, culture, arts. There's so much of it. And it's so beautifully diverse, and that whole community empowerment aspect of it is essentially about making change, positive change for local people, and that local people have ownership and lead that based on their own issues and needs of their own local community. They're experts in that. And that is true community empowerment, when people feel empowered to be able to do that. However, I think one of the reasons that, as a coalition we come together is to say, well, there's a lot about that needs to improve through policy. And so that's our reason for being, I suppose.
And I'm happy you said the word policy, because that obviously excites myself.
Because both of you really love it.
Absolutely, big policy now.
So we live for it.
Yeah, of course.
Well, don't ask me too many difficult questions.
No, it's okay. This one's for Duncan. So with new policy being passed in the most recent Scottish Parliament, we'll obviously have a new Parliament now. So the Community Wealth Building Act is now a thing. How do you think that the Community Wealth Building Act will interact with community-based organisations, and do you think they'll likely to support them, help them grow?
Yeah, I think this is really the key, to be honest. It's about how we align these different policy areas, because there's so much overlap between these different policy areas, community ownership, fair work, Community Wealth Building Act. There's so much overlap, and I think the Community Wealth Building Act is going to be that kind of umbrella, I guess. That's how it's seen, as a kind of a thing to bring all these different, diverse policy areas together, actually. And I think as part of that, yeah, definitely community ownership, social enterprise development, cooperative development, that's all part of it as well. I think it's just really important for us to kind of build a movement, really, because it's build a movement of movements, which is what Scottish Community Alliance is about in a lot of ways as well. It's a movement of movements, but it's also aligning it with social enterprises and with land reform and all this kind of stuff as well. So it's like, I think there's a lot of opportunities in the next Parliament, absolutely. And I think one of our main focuses is the community wealth building kind of process, initiative, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But I think the Act has been passed. It's got cross-party support, which is really important. Across all different political parties, there's a lot of consensus around this, but it's how do we make that a reality in practice in our local communities, and that's really the key, I think.
Yeah, and it's worth noting at the time that we're recording, we don't have a minister decided who will look over community wealth building currently, but definitely our plans over the summer are to bring out whoever that minister may be to different areas of Scotland, see social enterprises, see communities in action, in enacting community wealth building, essentially, so that they get a very visual on the ground. Because I think if you're not brought out to these places, then you don't really necessarily get a strong understanding of what it is. And I think, Jill, you must see that fairly often, because you've been running some community learning exchanges. So could you go into detail a wee bit about the community learning exchanges?
I was going to say as well, just on that obviously a really key other policy area that's not at the same stage as the community wealth building stuff, but nevertheless would be amazing leverage to actually make community wealth building sustainable in Scotland would be local governance. So how do you make sure community wealth building is sustainable when you have centralised decision making? I don't think you do. So we really need local decision making, local governance to be devolved to the most local level possible as well. And that's something else that we are working on with you guys and other members of our SCA membership. But yes, I can answer your question about the learning exchanges, and also some of the work we've been doing in terms of case studies around community wealth building, because just in the run-up last year, in the run-up to our Local People Leading event, and also to try and influence the community wealth building bill as it was going through Parliament, we worked with partners in greater community media who are driven by kind of local journalism, locally owned journalism, to tell stories about how the community sector in Scotland is already leading community wealth building. And actually, it's not a new thing. It's new terminology. However, our sector has been doing this for a really, really long time. And trying to highlight and showcase some of the hyper-local work that's happening across Scotland, and just basically showing these case studies of the fact that, there's a huge amount of wealth being generated, not just in terms of money, but in terms of the social impact from community organisations. And they're doing that in a system despite a really kind of fragile landscape around funding and investment, that it's an interesting kind of context, I think, for these organisations and groups, because actually they should be talking about investment and not funding. And that was one of the main kind of learnings that came out of it, that it's almost as if we've got this blueprint across the sector for how we could make community wealth building sustainable, and yet it's not invested in. They're not seen as equal partners around decision-making tables. They're not just seen as equal partners within procurement processes or asset transfers and stuff like that. So it was really to kind of highlight, look what's happening out there. What would be better? What could be better? So the hope is that that was the kind of first iteration of it, and then what we hope to do is maybe show some of that in practice. So the partnerships around the systems change of community wealth building that's needed to make it sustainable. So bringing in local authorities and other partnerships. So we're going to look to continue that thread of that first part of the project and move on to other case studies that show how it could be done in practice. Yeah, but I've completely gone past your asking about the learning exchange, Andy, sorry.
No, that's no problem whatsoever, because I think that really goes well into that we've got a new parliament right now. So that we're asking a question of that. So just the other day, the Scottish Parliament's Information Centre, SPICE, published a blog on what is the likely talking points for the next parliament going to look like. And number one on that list was the cost of living crisis that we're currently experiencing through. And you've mentioned blueprints there. And there is such a very clear connection, I think, of like, how do we solve the cost of living crisis? And it's like, well, we have these organisations on the ground who are doing amazing work economically. They're employing local people. Their wealth is staying here as well. Why is there not a direct investment into this to help try and solve this crisis?
Yeah.
That was a bit of a question that
Agreed.
It's just a kind of like, good point.
But I guess that's one of the challenges for the next year is all these new politicians, all these new MSPs are going to be there. And it's like, how do we get that message across to them about this is an investment? And I think that's the key word, as you said, is investment. It's not funding in that traditional sense necessarily. It's just, this is an investment in our communities. It's an investment in Scotland, effectively. And I think that's one of the key messages we really need to get across to our politicians. And I feel like, just to go back to that point about, I suppose, seeing stuff on the ground, it's like that's such a powerful thing as well. So us talking to politicians is all good, we need to do that as policy people, but it's when they see what's happening in their own local constituency, that's what's going to be really powerful, I think, as well. And then they can really, it really brings it home to them what we're talking about really as well. It's not just some policy on paper or an act of parliament, it's this is what's happening in your community, and if you invest in this can happen a lot more. I think that's one of the key points. Going
back to your question, Andy, about the learning exchange, so that is one of the ways that we seek to invest in our membership, is through that fund. So it's a fund that we distribute, that we get from the Scottish Government to support local organisations and groups to basically meet each other in person or online, but it's generally in person because it's much more impactful when it's in person. Visit each other, it doesn't matter where it is in Scotland, we'll try to cover the costs of that, up to £1,000 per exchange. And the impact of that fund for small amounts of money, and I would see those little pockets of micro funding actually as micro investments, because what it does is it saves a huge amount of time for people to go and learn from another organisation who's already on the journey themselves. It saves a huge amount of time and research, but it also builds up networks of support across the sector. So again, it's like that sustainability thing doesn't have to cost the earth. It's just about trying to sustain the stuff that's working really well for people. And we're at the point at the moment where we're waiting on the Scottish Government to tell us whether we get that money in for next year. But we're really hopeful that it does, because, you know, I feel that would be a significant loss to our sector if it wasn't there. And we'd have to look for other ways to try and enable that, because we know it's incredibly well used throughout the year.
And I think that's a really strong key message as well, to be honest. It's like small investments in our communities have big social impact. I think that's a really clear, really strong message to put across to them.
And I think that's an important one, right? So you're looking at kind of small amounts of money here and the massive social impact that there is. Could you imagine what would happen if that fund grew to maybe a medium-sized one?
Yeah.
And look at the social impact that could happen afterwards. Like, there is, I'd say, no limit to kind of the social and environmental impact that these organisations can have in Scotland. And if we are looking at kind of, with the way things are going globally, with instability rising all the time, I think there does need to be a strong look inwards towards the Scottish economy to be like, how can it be much more self-resilient and self-reliant on these areas? And I think social enterprises and community groups across that have done that time and time and time after time. And, you know, during the COVID pandemic, the Scottish Government, with complete trust, opened up to community organisations to help deliver services in their local areas. That's kind of been pulled back a little bit, but I think that trust needs to be redeveloped. Is that fair to say, Jill?
I don't think it needs to be redeveloped. I think it should be a given, actually, because I think the return that is there is pretty hard to quibble with. And, you know, when you think about risk, what sort of risk is taken when you look at the private business sector and what happens when it doesn't work? You know, that same sort of attitude should really be applied to our sector. And I just feel like the whole narrative around how we do funding needs to completely shift. It's like we're on this kind of precipice all the time, and that should not be the case. We are constantly, like you say, providing huge social impact. We're making sure that wealth is not extracted in ways that are so innovative, and yet people are constantly in this sort of precipice every sort of funding year. So I don't think it's a question of building trust, because, I mean, what more needs to be proven at this juncture in time?
I quite like the use of the word narrative as well that you said, because it is about narrative often as well. So we understand the reality of public finances, all this kind of stuff, but also there is a big pot of money there, and it's what it's spent on is really important. And it can be spent in other ways, in very creative and innovative ways. You know, you can unlock money from many places. And in terms of the tax system, for example, we're not very creative with our tax system. I always talk about tax all the time, but we're not very creative. We're not really looking at the system as a whole and just working out where we can get extra tax through land taxes, or obviously reform the council tax, all this kind of stuff, or business rates. You know, there's so many options there, and it's just like politicians and policymakers just need to be a bit more creative, because there is lots and lots of money there. It's just where it's spent.
I suppose as well, if you're thinking about trust, maybe the trust thing would be the other way, that actually our sector would, politicians and them, you know, would have to build up trust with their sector for us to really deliver on the ground the things. I mean, we already are, but that shift, that power shift, isn't top down. It's certainly bottom up. So that's the shift, I think, that would probably need to happen.
And I think it's one that's likely to happen, not to be too cautiously optimistic as I always am, but it's likely to happen because I think the Parliament, all the MSPs who have been elected for the next 5 years, have all been informed, even in the run-up to the election. We've had multiple financial forecasts for the Scottish Government, and the money that they're going to be receiving is going to get smaller and smaller every year for the next 5 years. The total spend that we have currently right now goes a lot onto kind of frontline services of like dealing with things at crisis point. So I think a big question needs to be asked is, why are we leaving things to get to crisis point in the first place? Which means you need to then follow a preventative agenda, which means an incredible amount of engagement with the community sector, because they know what's happening first and can be able to tell you the first signs of something going awry with a local community. Doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter where they are, they always are the ones the first to know. So if we can identify that early on, not only like will you improve that person's life who might be in crisis, but there's also huge savings there that can be redirected elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think you both come up with two key words there actually I picked up on. One was trust and one was prevention. And I think it's shifting our kind of political culture or economic culture, whatever you want to call it, to a system of trust where we trust each other better. And yes, that mythical shifting to prevention, shifting to early intervention, I think is really, really important. But there are case studies as well. I think maybe it's Australia where they've come up with some kind of model around prevention and early intervention, which apparently works. And that issue of trust as well. A lot of the Scandinavian countries are really good at trust. Just in the society in general, people just trust each other better. They trust their institutions better, that kind of thing as well, because they're more responsive, more democratic. So I think we can learn from other countries. I think that's really important. But I think those key words are really important as well. Trust and prevention. That's what we need going forward.
Can I pick up a key word from you there, Duncan? You used the word democratic, and I think that's where we're kind of hoping this conversation can go towards, because if we're going to have this preventative agenda, if we're going to have further engagement with the community sector, then there needs to be an exchange of and trust of letting communities do what's right for them, but they need the powers to back that up. Mm-hmm. So we had legislation in the Scottish Parliament which was not passed last session to do with kind of local democracy matters. I think that's going to inevitably come back into this next Parliament. But Jill, from a local democracy perspective, what would you like that to look like? You've already talked about how some powers need to be devolved further, but how else can you imagine local democracy in Scotland?
That's a really big question,
it's
Andy.
Huge. It's absolutely massive. So I'm sorry to leave you with it. But
I think we need statutory rights to local democracy. I think there's lots of amazing participatory tools and approaches to local democracy that already exist, like citizens' assemblies and stuff like that. But they only go so far. You actually need legislative, huge structural change for decision making to be devolved to the most local level possible, and I think that needs to go beyond local authorities. I'm talking about like local communities having say over, in a hyper local way, how resources and investment and everything else, health, education, is how decisions around that are made. And it's not to say that the community sector should be the bearers of that and have taken full responsibility, but they have to be absolute equal partners in how decisions are made locally. It's not that sort of trickle down model of democracy. It must sit with the people on a local level. So like in a utopian world, that's what I would like to see, definitely.
But I think there's something in there as well. So from that Spice blog that I mentioned earlier, one of the other things that came up is about community cohesion. And I think a really big part of community cohesion is about people feel like, whether it's politicians or at a much higher level, whether that's Holyrood or Westminster, things are just kind of happening to them. Things are happening to their communities, and there's occasionally a consultation sent out, but is that widely spread out? Is there much engagement through there? Not always, as we know. So I think having those local powers devolved further stops that kind of community cohesion breakdown. There's a massive distrust of politicians, Westminster, Scottish Government, at every specific level.
No wonder.
I mean, there's been some issues, absolutely, completely. But from devolution to now, I think the fall in trust within Scottish government from 99 to now, and that doesn't matter who was in power politically, but there's been steady falls throughout. And we've had different political parties at different points as well. But there's this just kind of mistrust of the system. And I think if you don't open the doors at early levels, at local community level, then you're just going to have this consistently forever. So not only is it a huge part of a way to boost the Scottish economy, but I think it's a huge part of making people kind of trust and get on with each other again. We talk about division all the time, but I mean, if people engage with their communities, you see a lot less division.
I would say that it's one of the main reasons why, the Community Empowerment Act, which in a sense the whole community wealth building is in danger of as well, the legislation around community wealth building, that if people are not empowered locally to make decisions about their own lives, their own communities, then these things will fall to the wayside, or they'll be so hard to achieve that it only happens in kind of pockets, or, it's dependent on the skills, particularly in that area, who can pick things up like asset transfers, or, it's never going to be that kind of equal access to empowerment because there isn't local decision making, and there aren't the structures around it to support it. It's interesting because I've had these conversations a lot with different people who, rightly will say, well, we'll just do it anyway. Yes, we should just do it anyway. We'll just do it anyway. But you're always going to come up against something if there isn't the structural change or the statutory legislation in place that gives you that power. So you need both. I think you always need both. And I think it's amazing that our sector are doing it anyway, but they're doing it in really, really difficult, challenging circumstances that don't need to be there.
There's so many good examples of all this stuff happening, but it's like it's not happening at scale. I think that's the issue, isn't it? So there's I can point to loads of case studies, where something's working really well around community ownership, whatever it might be, community ownership of energy, land, buildings, whatever. But it's just in pockets, as you say. It's just in certain places that have often those advantages, and it's like, how do we get that to scale, I guess, and how do we scale this stuff? Okay, so it becomes the norm.
Yes.
So social enterprise becomes the norm, community ownership becomes the norm, cooperatives, whatever it is, kind of thing, these become normal, and it's reaching that, I suppose, that tipping point. And again, I think there's some percentage, like 22%, once the economy is, 22% social business, whatever, then it becomes a tipping point for the rest of the economy. So it's how to reach that tipping point. And there are some really, I suppose, big ambitions around this with the IDBM report, the Inclusive Democratic Business Models report we had previously, around dramatically increasing the numbers of these business models, including community ownership and development trusts. But it's it is, I keep coming back to that word tipping point, but I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in there about this new parliament with engagement. It shouldn't take the community sector to coming into the Scottish Parliament to meet politicians. MSPs need to come out to their communities and get to know them. We've got evidence, we've got lots of data, we've got fantastic case studies, as you've said, Duncan, of things happening at a local area, but we need these honest, at times bureaucratic barriers to be moved out the way for communities to kind of get on with what they're doing and make life easier for them. So I'd say this is a bit of an open invite to the next Scottish Government and to those who are sitting in Holyrood to come out, get stuck in with your local communities, see what's happening on the ground, and then start advocating for them within that chamber. Because we need help at that policy making level, but communities can also help the Parliament operate better with new faces to come in to give evidence, with new examples of things happening on the ground. I'm sure the next Parliament will again be looking at the issue of land ownership across Scotland. Communities have some fantastic examples of what they've done with land that they've managed to get their hands on. If you could imagine that at a much bigger scale, but we need help with that scale up. And I think that's an opportunity for Scottish parliamentarians and Scottish Government to kind of get stuck in and come meet the other communities.
That local level of knowledge is golden. And why it's not tapped into more in a meaningful way, I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. I wish we could shift the dial. In a way, I just feel a bit fatigued by our sector, and our sector's fatigued to try to prove itself. I think that needs to be a thing of the past. And in this new Parliament, we need to have totally fresh perspective on the sector and see it for what it is. It is golden.
As you said as well, I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, isn't it, of the success of these kind of initiatives. And it's like, around community ownership or social enterprise. And it's like, I suppose it's a job for us is to, make sure we have that evidence and make sure we explain that better to politicians. Because, they will respond to evidence and statistics and all this kind of stuff with the social enterprise census or whatever it might be. So it's a case of them listening to us, but also us, I think, providing that evidence as well, which can be expensive to produce, to be honest. But yeah.
The point is as well, though, is that, I say it's golden because I think it is, but it's not to say this isn't without challenge. I mean, like local democracy, yes, wonderful, but it's going to be really messy, it's going to be complex, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and that's it. Like, again, that goes back to what people are doing locally all the time. It's messy, complex, but they're doing it anyway, and they're doing amazing stuff. And okay, sometimes it doesn't always work, but let's just trust it.
I was going to say, do you think it's an issue with, or come back to the big picture about policy making, do you think it's an issue with that? Because it's like, we can see the solutions, we know what the solutions are, we know what needs to happen, but often it doesn't happen.
The policy doesn't keep pace, does it? It's like we were going back to saying about community wealth building. It's been happening for a long time, and now we've got community wealth building policy. So there's something about the lag between policy making, and that's always the case, I suppose, isn't it? But yeah, I think it's how and the approach as well to policy making that probably isn't working particularly well.
I suppose that brings us full circle to the Democracy Matters work as well, doesn't it? It's like, if we could get that right, that then feeds into better policy making and better community support for community ownership, that kind of thing. It's all part of the same thing. I think we also need to bridge this gap between economic democracy and political democracy. That sounds a bit of a policy person's phrase to use, and people are like, what the hell's that? But it's basically like democracy in our economy, social enterprise, community ownership. It's kind of as simple as that, really, as well. But it's like bridging that gap between that and the decision making of governments, local authorities, and community councils, etc. as well. So I feel like there's still a disconnect there between those two things. But I feel like the community sector bridges that gap really well, because it's both. It's democratic, direct, people empowerment, plus it's contributing to its local economy with jobs, etc. So I think that does bridge the gap really well in practice. But it's like, I still think in our minds those things are disconnected.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about investment, I was at one of your cross-party groups when John Swinney was chairing that group, and I remember him saying that it's not a question of there being no money, because there is money. It's a question of where it's invested, which is what you said. But he said that. So if he's listening to this at any point, so just a wee reminder.
On the record.
On the record to the First Minister. He did say that.
He's an ally, and we will lobby him hard going forward to keep him as an ally.
But I think that's something to point out, is that often I think governments and parliaments and politicians themselves can maybe get wrapped up and kind of hit the brakes sometimes if they don't necessarily understand something. So they've usually got in-house political party researchers, or maybe they'll have special advisors in these areas. But when we talk about community level stuff, as you said, Jill, it's complex, it's difficult, but it's worthwhile doing. But the people who are doing it know how to operate complex and difficult things as well. So there needs to be that engagement with them. Maybe have a special advisor in communities, have just somebody named in local communities who can be like, this is somebody to go to. They know the ins and outs of it. They know the personalities that sometimes you have to deal with at local levels, but they're very successful at navigating these things. And again, there needs to be a trust there. If you just have a blanket one size fits all to every community in Scotland, it's not going to go down well. It's not going to operate.
No, and you know something, that isn't a hard thing to achieve, because all it takes is a bit of communication between, you know, civil servants and us in the sector, and you can go, they're the people to talk to. And it's there. Again, it's there for the taking.
I feel like it's just getting across that key message as well about this is foundational, what we're talking about. This feeds into everything else. We're talking about the economy effectively. That's what we're talking about here, and democracy, of course, and all these related things. But it's about the economy. If politicians want economic growth, if they want a sustainable, successful Scottish economy, then what we're doing in our various respective sectors is foundational to all this. It will help solve other social problems. So we're aware that obviously there's a lot happening in politics. There's a lot happening in the world that politicians and civil servants have to deal with. But this is foundational. This is kind of one of the starting points as well. It's getting the economy right will feed into better mental health. It will feed into better housing. It feeds into all these different things. So if we can really get that message across to the next parliament, to all the new MSPs and the next government, I think that'll be really important.
Yeah, I think one of the things, a less positive thing that I reflected on from the local people leading event in February was, at the end of the day, we had a cross-party panel, and it really struck me from that panel that we've got a hell of a lot of work to do. Maybe not in this new tranche of people coming in, maybe they'll get it, but what was highlighted to me was actually they didn't get what we mean by local democracy and governance. The impression I got from right across each party was that they are it. They are our local governance. They are, and I suppose in a sense at the moment that the status quo is that is how it is. But when we were talking about that kind of progressive policy shift and structural shift, this was like new information to them, you know, and they didn't get that devolved nature of it and what we mean by the community sector in Scotland. I say it a lot, and I probably bore people because I say it a lot, but our sector gets lost in the broader third sector, and we need to get more clear about what we mean about the community sector in Scotland, so that there is that distinction, and so that we are more able to make the case for local governance and how our sector provides that blueprint, if you like, for how it could work alongside community wealth building.
And I think that's a job for all of us here around this table to do, is just to kind of engage with newer members of that parliament, to be like, hello, we're here, this is what we can offer you, but if you engage with us, we can offer so much more. So I think it's an open call to them as well. And to be fair to the Scottish Parliament, they're PACT, which is their parliamentary and community engagement team, have made some changes recently, which have been really positive. They've been leaving the Scottish Parliament, they've been going out into local communities to get voices and to see what's happening there, to try and help people engage with parliamentary democracy so much more. I think that's absolutely to be commended. So follow that good example, please, MSPs within Scottish Parliament.
But they need more resource as well to do that, and they're very under-resourced. So I think that's again a shift in terms of what you see as an investment in the sector, that PAC team should have a bit more capacity and oomph around it. And I should say that they were very supportive of our event as well. They were very
I feel like Parliament's been quite proactive recently in terms of we've been invited to a couple of events in Parliament to meet new MSPs for different sectors. I think that's how they've been doing it, which is really important. So I really like the fact they're doing that. Mm-hmm. I think the outreach team and the PAC team are really, really good actually at what they do. But yeah, you're right, they need more resources. I'm sure they wouldn't argue with that as well. They they need more staff, need more funding.
Yeah, and this won't be the first or last time that we make these points to Scottish parliamentarians. We plan to engage with them fully for the next 5 years, because we both have manifestos that are posted across, and that's not necessarily just an offer for policy in their manifestos that popped up. That's an offer for, this is what you need to engage with over the next 5 years of this Scottish Parliament. And with the current makeup of that, it's up to any political party really to engage, and they can probably get some wins across that board. So we look forward to working with you all in the future for
Absolutely.
MSPs
Yes,
that are
we
listening.
do.
But yeah, no, I just want to say a big thank you, Jill, for coming along today.
Thanks for
Time's
having me.
absolutely
Thank you.
flown
It's
by.
been an absolute pleasure, I have to say, talking to you too.
Is there anything that you would like to plug
Working with you
for
too.
Scottish Community Alliance coming up?
So, just a bit of local democracy, really. So, we're working with you guys and other members to. So, just a bit of background before I rabbit on. Basically, from the local people leading event, we were given a mandate to go away and produce our own blueprint on local democracy and what that could look like. So that is something we are actively working on at the moment with yourselves and others. And also just to revisit some of the community wealth building case studies on our website that were recently created. They're only 3-minute films, but they're really impactful. And just keep in mind that we will be producing something else in that similar vein soon, hopefully.
Love to see it. The videos have been absolutely fantastic. We can put a link to those videos in the description below, but just in case anybody's listening and wants to type on their phone right now, Jill, what is the website for the Scottish Community Alliance? Is it just scottishcommunityalliance.co.uk?
Yeah.
But yeah, just want to say thanks for listening today, folks, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now. Thanks for listening, folks. This has been Building Wealth, Building Community, Social Enterprise Scotland podcast with me, Andy Patterson, and Duncan Thorpe. If you need to get in touch at any time about all things social enterprise, please do visit socialenterprise.scot. Goodbye for now.